Good evening. Dr. Martin Luther King, the apostle of nonviolence in the civil rights movement, has been shot to death in Memphis, Tennessee. Police have issued an all-points bulletin for a well-dressed young white man seen running from the scene. Officers also reportedly chased and fired on a radio-equipped car containing 2 white men. Dr. King was standing on the balcony of a second-floor hotel room tonight when, according to a companion, a shot was fired from across the street. In the friend's words, the bullet exploded in his face. Police, who have been keeping a close watch over the Nobel Peace Prize winner because of Memphis' turbulent racial situation, were on the scene almost immediately. They rushed the 39-year-old Negro leader to a hospital where he died of a bullet wound in the neck.
That, of course, was Walter Cronkite 50 years ago today, announcing the violent death of Dr. Martin Luther King on the CBS Evening News. Since then, many have wondered how America would have been different had he lived. It's just one of the many questions being asked alongside the tributes being paid today all over the world. Vann Newkirk is a staff writer for The Atlantic and the author of a new piece called The Whitewashing of King's Assassination. He joins us now from Washington. Vann, thank you so much for joining us. And I love your work, but this piece in particular is really, really great. So thank you for coming by.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So what I love about this piece is that it sort of has a contrarian view to a lot of the tributes that are pouring out today over the 50-year anniversary. And I'm just going to read a little bit of what you wrote here, and we'll talk about it. You write that King spoke of a, quote, white backlash, a term he helped popularize. But in retrospect, the strength of the reaction he predicted and endured often received short shrift. The support of white moderates who recoiled at images of Negro children sprayed by hoses and attacked by dogs was instrumental in passing laws that ended legal segregation and protected voting rights. But by 1966, it had become clear that many of these whites chafed against further activism and greater demands for equality. They viewed the Voting Rights Act as a final concession. King saw it as a start. It almost sounds, and this is going to sort of add a little bit of pop culture to your brilliant writing, but that Dr. King was sort of in a sunken place here.
That's an interesting way to put it, I think.
Yeah, because it feels like, you know...
I would say, yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
I would say, if we're using the sunken place, it's probably more apt to say America was in the sunken place in '68. You have this basically experience of being trapped. You have a legacy of a man, and basically racial progress, our understanding of black and white relations are frozen in that recollection, but the recollection is false, as I say in the piece.
Yeah, because you talk about the whitewashed version of Dr. King's legacy. I just want to focus a little bit on that. The idea that by the time Ronald Reagan announced the holiday for Dr. King, he mentioned his colorblind justice and he quoted from I Have a Dream, but that he's been sort of homogenized for white America and for the mollification of African Americans in this country.
Yeah, I think Reagan is an instrumental piece of this because Reagan speaks often for that silent majority of folks. He speaks for white America in many cases. And the contrast in his stances on King are sort of what I zero in on that. So on the day that King was assassinated as governor of California, Reagan basically said, you know, when we choose the laws that we break, it essentially creates conditions in which King is assassinated. So he basically blames King for his own assassination. You fast forward then 15 years to when Reagan's the president, and he's basically saying King's a great American. You know, he's quoting the Dream speech, saying he fought for a colorblind society. So reconciling those two versions of Reagan helps us understand the sort of the magic that was used in order to create a version of King that was palatable to people who in 1968 majority disapproved of him.
So that was my next question. April 4th, 1968. Give us some context, not just on what Dr. King was doing in Memphis, but how he was feeling. You write that he was demoralized.
Yeah, in the last couple years of his life, it's documented that King had mental health crises. His friends, his family, his colleagues were worried about him. He had taken some time to think about where he was going. His organization, the Southern Christian Leadership Coalition, they were actually facing bankruptcy in some months. So he was at a crossroads in his own career and life, and choosing to go to Memphis and engage in an economic justice fight for him was the beginning of his next chapter. It was the Poor People's Campaign. They were planning that year to use the momentum from a successful strike in Memphis with those workers to begin rallying poor folks from around the South, black, white, people of all races, to take mule trains to the nation's capital to basically make an entire city in D.C. for as long as it took to create meaningful national legislation to fight poverty.
And he was dealing with so many challenges. I recently sat down with Harry Belafonte, and he told me an anecdote about a practical concern that maybe a lot of people may not be aware of, but I want to play that for viewers and get your reaction.
Dr. King was often concerned about the economics of his life. Lloyd's of London wouldn't give me $1 million policy. So I had to take what I could get from insurance companies who would not insure him for much beyond $100,000. I tried to assure him that as long as I was alive, he would never have to worry about the economics of his life.
What does that anecdote tell you about how Dr. King was seen during his lifetime, and some of those other challenges you write about in your piece? You know, the J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI, the anger that was coming from sort of more extreme factions of the African American community. How was he seen?
Yeah, I think the sort of depressing piece about that recollection from Mr. Belafonte is the fact that King was intimately aware of his death. He pretty much predicted that he was going to die, not just in the mountaintop speech, but in all of the contingencies that the SCLC had. His family understood this. It was just sort of taken for granted almost after all the bombings, the stabbings, and all of the threats against him that one day somebody was going to succeed. And that bled into, I think, when you look at the mountaintop speech as a capstone of his career, his life, what he was thinking about, he knew his death was coming. Whether it was tomorrow, the day after or not, nobody knows, but he knew it was coming, and he was trying to prepare his followers, Black America and white America, for what came next. Ralph Abernathy and Coretta Scott King picked up the mantle of the Poor People's Campaign immediately after, and they went to the Capitol. He wanted people to understand that there was going to be unrest in the cities. White flight was still going to continue and crystallize, but there was still much more to be had on the economic justice front, on racial justice, on ideas and possibilities that he hadn't even thought of. And so I think you see King, the planner, in those last couple months, thinking ahead, thinking of what America might be today, and that's critical.
Vann, before I let you go, I just want to ask one last question. And again, it goes back to your, what you say here in your piece about Dr. King sort of being packaged for white consumption. In the era that we're living in today, when we see young people protesting Black Lives Matter, one of the things that I've seen and have heard from conservative commentators is, why can't the BLM movement or other people who are protesting police brutality and other injustices look to Dr. King and take his message of nonviolence? And I sort of unpack that for us. Why are conservatives asking young people today to look to something that Dr. King may have advocated during his early years in Selma and other places? And is that what you mean by white consumption?
Yeah, I think most of those critiques are based in a willful self-delusion here. People during King's time sent him the same exact critiques. They said he was pushing too hard, too fast, that he was subversive, lots of people, I've actually read letters saying, why can't King be more like Thurgood Marshall, an activist who came a decade before him during the Brown v. Board case. So this is a cyclical thing. You look at people talking to Black Lives Matter today, and I actually just cannot distinguish those arguments from the arguments made against King himself. It's people complaining, okay, actually I agree with the goal of racial justice, but you guys are moving too fast. You're making too many people angry. People said those same things about King, they called the activists today, they called the activists in the 90s and the 80s subversive. They called him subversive. The more things change, the more they say the same. And we're sort of on a treadmill of black activism, thinking of how white America responds to it.
Vann Newkirk, really great piece in The Atlantic, How to Kill a Revolution. It's what it's called. I urge our viewers to go and check it out. Thank you so much for spending some time with us today.